week's edition of the Pete Mezzetti Show. I'm your host, Pete Mezzetti. My guest this evening is Bob Rader, who's the executive director of CABE. Bob, welcome. How are you, my friend?
Good to see
you in person. It's
Yeah.
usually we see each other through Zoom, but it's actually nice to have you in studio with you. Welcome back.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
How have you been?
We've been pretty good.
Good.
Rather busy.
Oh, you think?
It's been a different kind of year.
Absolutely.
But we've done pretty well.
Yeah, good. So, Bob, tell us a little bit about CABE and exactly what you guys do.
So we represent the boards of education across the state. Not everyone, but pretty close.
Okay.
And we do advocacy. In other words, going up to the legislature, hearing what they have to say, talking to legislators about some of the issues that affect school boards. And obviously, by school boards, I mean also school districts, superintendents, teachers, and of course our students.
Right.
We put out journals. We do work in employee relations. We do convention every year, biggest convention in Connecticut every year for school board members. So there's a lot we're always doing. We provide legal advice, all kinds of things for boards of education, whatever can help them be more effective in their roles.
Right. Now, as far as your background, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are with CABE.
Well, it's interesting. I grew up on Long Island.
Okay.
I went to Cornell undergraduate.
All right.
I went to Albany Law School. Out of Albany Law School, about 4 months after I graduated, I started a job with the New York State School Boards.
Okay.
I was there 15 years and did all kinds of things with them. I was a lobbyist, assistant counsel. I ran their risk management program. I ran their policy and negotiations programs. And one day I'm reading Education Week, which is the weekly education news from across the country, and I saw there was an advertisement for somebody to become the executive director of Connecticut's association. And so I applied, and that was 26 years ago.
Wow.
25 and a half.
Long, all right.
I don't want to cheat.
No, of course not. You like it?
Yeah. I have great people working for me. I have a great board of directors, and it's been up and down, of course, because education has been, and it's a tough role, but I really enjoy it.
Now let's talk about the way education has been, especially in the last school year and last year of the pandemic, at least last year of the pandemic, as far as the way things look from the start of everything to what they're looking like now. Because right now, we were talking off camera, the school year's almost about to end.
Well, it's been a hard year, and I've got to compliment in particular the teachers, the paraprofessionals, the school counselors, certainly the superintendents and our boards for going through such a tough year. You know, nobody comes onto a board of education, which is a volunteer job. Nobody gets paid.
No.
Because they want to give back to their communities, and they give back to their communities, but over the last year that has been very difficult. Certainly we started off with all of a sudden on March, I believe it was 17th, actually the St. Patrick's Day, the schools closed down.
Right.
And from that time till the beginning of the summer, there was lots of discussion. Well, what are we going to do? How are we going to provide education to our kids even though they're at home? So a number of people went into action, including the Dalio Foundation, certainly the State Department of Education, superintendents and so on, and they made sure it's taken a while, but every kid who needs one has a laptop, has a hotspot, and is able to communicate with teachers and maintain their education.
Right.
I guess one of the breaking points came, not breaking points literally, but one of those inflection points, I guess people call it now, came last July when the commissioner, then Miguel Cardona, said, as the governor wanted it, that every school had to have 3 plans: a hybrid plan, a completely remote plan, and an in-person plan for the next year.
Right.
So everybody worked real hard on doing that, and then it was decided that superintendents would make the decisions of who would come back.
Right.
And they do that in conjunction with the Department of Health. So these are two groups that work together somewhat, but over the last year had to work together very hard.
Absolutely.
They had to decide, how to do contact tracing, how far apart students had to be, putting in dividers on desks and so on to protect our kids when they come back. So they came back, a number of them in the fall, slowly but surely they all pretty much came back, and I think it's a real success story. I never stop marveling at how the people who worked on this from the medical point of view did. To come up with a vaccine in a year and a half.
Right.
Not everybody has taken it yet.
Right.
We understand there are issues with that.
Absolutely.
And we understand that kids under 12 can't get it yet, but they will eventually.
Absolutely.
And they came up with this almost a miracle cure.
Right.
And certainly we have watched as the State Department of Education, now under Acting Commissioner Charlene Russell Tucker, has worked with people from DPH,
right.
Including Matt Carter, the state epidemiologist, to talk every week, every Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock, and this is open to anybody, and it's not going to be every week anymore. We learned today, I think it's going to be every 2 weeks or every month, I don't remember exactly. Okay. But they would tell people, this is what you have to do on contact tracing, these are the documents you need to know about, this is what you should do in these various situations that had superintendents and others flummoxed. There are lots of different questions, and every week it's been a real pleasure to see them, and they keep things, I don't want to say light,
right.
because it's a heavy subject.
Absolutely.
But with a touch of real understanding, passion for what they're doing, and understanding of how important it is what the school districts are doing, including the superintendents and the principals and the teachers to help our kids.
Now, what you mentioned the Delio Foundation?
Well, the Delio Foundation.
What is it?
Well, that's run by Ray Dalio,
okay.
With Barbara Dalio, two of our friends who have done very, very well in the work he has done, not mutual funds, but in providing financial advice to people.
Sure.
And I believe it's the biggest fund in Connecticut, and it's run by these two people who care very much about our schools,
okay.
and who have over the years given much money to schools, and they stepped in when we realized we needed to come up with more computers for our kids, more laptops, and they rushed right in, working with a couple of the superintendents who volunteered, Nate Quinnell from East Hartford, and Paul Freeman, who is in Guilford, and they worked together to make sure all kids had laptops. And we have to remember that the kids were at home, so were the parents,
right.
so were the brothers and sisters. So all at once you had everybody needing bandwidth, being able to figure out what's going on in their schools, talking to teachers, talking to other people, and we're very lucky in Connecticut. We have some wonderful charitable groups that help this happen. And it's just, to me, it's an amazing story. And certainly one of the most amazing parts was when we got a call late last fall that Commissioner Cardona was
right.
going down to the U.S. Department of Education.
That's right.
He is a wonderful, wonderful man with a good understanding of what the states need based on even the rather short time we had him as commissioner. I had many, many dealings with him. We were on the phone all the time, as was he, with the superintendents and the principals and the teachers' unions and other groups who were making very, very tough decisions. And I want to just talk about those tough decisions
absolutely.
for a second.
Yeah.
The way things seemed to play out was that a huge decision or huge planning had to be done by July As I said before,
Yep.
3 plans for each district. Now, July is usually somewhat of a downtime for superintendents and boards.
Right.
But that didn't really happen last year.
No.
And they've had to work right through the year. They didn't have times or as much time as usual, certainly for vacations and so on.
Exactly.
And they make a decision that, say, the elementary schools are coming back because there hasn't really been showing that there's a lot of contagion by the younger kids.
Okay.
But what happened was, at some points, the teachers would say, no, we don't think it's safe enough. The community is saying, those parents who are in the houses with the kids
Right.
are saying, no, please take them back to school.
Exactly.
So whatever decision was made in some cases was very difficult. Now, I know of some districts, like Old Saybrook, for instance,
Sure.
with Superintendent Peruccio,
Right.
and one of my old friends now, not in age, but in the time she has put into public education, Eileen Baker, who has been on
Sure.
my board when I first came into to Connecticut. They made good decisions. They're trusted by their communities to make the right decisions. And my understanding is that board works very well. And certainly Superintendent Peruccio is one of the stars among the superintendents. There are a number of them, and I'm not going to start naming those who are and those who aren't.
No, because you might miss somebody.
Exactly, or name the wrong one to the wrong crowd.
Exactly.
But certainly Superintendent Peruccio is somebody who has given us a lot of advice on issues over the years, and it's been terrific. Terrific.
Absolutely.
So getting back to Commissioner Cardona, we
Yes.
got a call that the commissioner was going down to Washington. We wished him nothing but luck. We have watched him, and every now and then when I see him on television, he recently spoke to the National School Boards Association's
Okay.
Federal Advocacy Institute, which happened to just last week. Seems like a long time ago,
Yeah, right.
but last week he spoke to them, and I every now and then I'll text him because I know how busy he is, and he always gets back to me with a thank you or how happy he is. But I think the president and vice president made a great choice when they picked Miguel. He's a good friend. He's a smart guy. He understands how difficult some of these issues have been, and he is so passionate about public education, and we very much appreciate it.
I've never had a chance to interview him, but he seems very genuine and like a very hospitable and very nice guy.
That's how he is.
Okay.
Now, he's not afraid to be tough when he has to
Right.
be. And we've had some of those kind of meetings too.
Oh, absolutely.
And we can't agree on everything. But as a commissioner of education, I thought he was wonderful. And I was sorry he left, except that I knew it was bittersweet because he was going to have a huge effect on kids and teachers and superintendents and principals throughout the country. He's who we need there at this time.
Now, who took over for him when he left?
Acting commissioner is now Charlene Russell Tucker.
Okay.
Charlene is a wonderful, thoughtful person, has been passionate about education, and we've worked on all kinds of family engagement. We've worked on discipline, absenteeism, all kinds of different issues. She's been with the department for quite a while.
Oh, wow.
We don't know if she'll be made permanent, but she's a pleasure to work with. She gets back to us quickly and really tries to pull people together. You know, Connecticut, I came from New York, I mentioned before.
Yep.
Well, New York is the kind of place where everybody has real sharp elbows. Everybody is trying to make their own name. Everybody tries to show how big and important they are. Connecticut, it's different. We've known people for many years in the same jobs. It's a smaller state, it's more collegial, and I'm happy to say that we do work on some things together with the unions, certainly with CAPS and Executive Director Fran Rabinowitz and Paul Freeman, who is now president of CAPS.
Okay.
We work with them all the time, as well as with Glenn Lungarini. Glenn, our friend at CAS
Absolutely.
CIAC. But we do work with the unions, and we don't agree with everything.
No,
and
of course
certainly over the last year, there were plenty of times when we disagreed. But I think deep down, people care very much about public education, and we're willing to make compromises when we have to. Absolutely. And it's really a pleasure, especially I would compare it to New York, where you might not see these same people in a room again.
Right.
So I think that adds to a little of the feeling that they have to show off. But in Connecticut, you know, it's really a small state, and we all know people in the education system and working for public education or for the private education. So it's more collegial, it's more fun, and I think it's more thoughtful in some cases about what we can do in the state. Absolutely.
And like you mentioned earlier, that Glenn Longarini from CASCIAC, who's a mutual friend of both of ours, he was actually here not long ago.
Yeah, well,
always good to see him.
Yes, definitely, definitely.
Good to see him.
He's had a very tough year. I mean, if we remember last year what was happening with sports, and once again, the school districts may feel one way, the parents of the students felt a different way, and sometimes, and so these are no-win situations, but they were done with the help of the Department of Health. They were done with science and facts, and I think that's what the people of Connecticut want and what they deserve.
Absolutely, and the other person we have to mention is probably the governor. He's done
absolutely. The governor made a lot of very tough decisions. He's still making them.
Yeah.
He has a great staff around him. They have some wonderful people who really helped over the last year.
Right.
You know, we had municipal calls once a week with the head of DPH. With people high up in the governor's office. Very often the governor was there. Very often the deputy, the lieutenant governor, sorry, not a deputy, but lieutenant governor was on these calls. They took lots and lots of questions from school boards as well as from mayors and selectmen across the state. And I really think that Connecticut did a good job. Not perfect, but we did about as well as we could do. And you know, I keep looking at these positivity rate numbers, and they go down lower and lower and lower. And I saw I think I saw zeros today for the number of people who passed away due to COVID or were admitted to the hospital. And that is just a testament to our medical people and the thoughtful way in which Connecticut has approached these very difficult issues.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, as far as the way that the school's year looked this year as compared to maybe how it's going to look in the fall when they resume the school year, what do you think?
Well, I can tell you that the issue of whether kids are going to have to wear masks is arising among many of our school districts. Parents think it's time to take the masks off, but DPH hasn't said that, and the CDC, the federal government, health people haven't said that yet. I am hoping that there'll be a decision sometime over the summer. It would be great to have kids not have to wear masks. But you know, with all the talk we had, especially last spring, how are they going to go back to school, especially the young ones wearing masks? It sort of became a non-issue. And that's because the kids are great. I think the parents did a great job telling them, yes, you have to wear masks, but it protects all of us. We still haven't seen inoculations for those under 12, but we do see as we go to 14, to 16, to 18, we see more and more of our students have been vaccinated. So we don't know exactly what it will look like next year. Certainly, there'll be less remote learning, more in-school learning. School districts have been given the opportunity, school boards and superintendents, to decide whether or not they want to continue remote. There's no, as far as we know, there is no requirement that any school district have remote learning. But we do know that there's a law, I don't know if a bill, I don't know if it's been signed by the governor yet, that will require the State Department of Education to come up with 180 days of of education K to 12
Okay.
That can be done in a remote way. And we don't know how that will play out. We think, as do the commissioner, as do the unions, the superintendents and the principals, that the best place for our kids is in school.
Absolutely.
Where they have a chance to be socialized, they meet other kids, they get to know their teachers, they get to know what's happening in so many different subjects. They have a chance to maybe be in the band or play sports.
Exactly.
So we think that the sooner kids get back to school, the better. And now we're seeing the school year sort of wrap up.
Yep.
It was a hard year.
It was.
And we do know that some school districts were into hybrid, out of hybrid, and so on. But it was an amazing experience. And again, my hat's off to all those in the education system who made it possible for kids to do well, even under these very trying circumstances.
It's got to be very interesting to actually do remote learning, as far as having to like log in. The teacher's got to make sure everybody's there logged in, and if you're not, like, it says you're logged in and you're really not there, can they tell?
Well, it's interesting because my wife teaches at a community college, and of course the kids are older.
Right.
But they've made a decision to get into these classes.
Ah.
And she says, well, all of a sudden, we'll just see the name of the child, not the whole
Not the head.
live head.
Yeah.
And she'll ask a question of a student, maybe a student who had before said they wanted extra help, and she'll ask a question during the class, and there'll be no response. So that's hard. Now you can do better with kids,
right?
Because I think the teacher has more authority and can certainly call the parents or talk to the parents. But it's tough. It's tough, and it's hard to sit in a chair, as we as adults know, and just do work for more hours, being on a Zoom call or go to meeting, whatever it is. And by the end of the day, you're pretty tired out.
Yeah.
It's not like sitting in a class where you have breaks and so on.
Right.
But I know teachers have done their best to make these really good educational programs. And again, hats off to them, hats off to the students who did well and really worked at it. One of the problems we have found, and I've seen a lot of writing on it, is a number of students haven't checked in.
Okay.
They're mostly the older students.
Okay.
It's believed to be about 3% of them. And you know, it's concerning. Plus, we do believe that Connecticut's, the number of students enrolled has also gone down by about 3%. So we're seeing some big differences in the demographics and numbers, and certainly that will be reflected in the decisions made by local boards of educations with their superintendents.
Right. Now, is there a time frame that the person who took over for Dr. Cardona, is there a time frame that they have to appoint someone?
No, I think the State Board of Education has to make a decision. Has to do a search unless they decide not to. The governor's got to approve, and then it goes through the
legislature,
the Senate. Yeah.
Okay.
So there is no time for that yet, and I have not heard of them doing a search. I think this has been a tough year for everybody.
Oh yeah.
I think. Acting Commissioner Russell Tucker has done very, very nicely, and I sure hope that she has a good shot at it. I can't say she's my #1 favorite, because though I think she's terrific, who knows who else may come up, but I think she's terrific.
Now, how closely do you guys work with the legislature?
Very, very closely. Our deputy executive director and general counsel, Patrice McCarthy, is up at the legislature all the time. And between her and Sheila McKay, who is our senior staff associate for government relations, are always watching what's happening. And it's been extra hard this year because the legislative office building,
Right.
as well as the Capitol, have been closed.
Oh, yeah.
So there have been Zoom meetings, and they certainly watch it on CTN and
Yep.
wherever else they can get a hold of it. And they will talk to legislators, as will our members, about specific issues. And so that is ongoing. Now, the legislature has not quite finished its work. The Senate, I believe, was in today.
Yeah, I
They're doing
believe
the
so.
implementer bill, and my understanding is that a lot of it has to do with education.
Okay.
There's information on reading and ensuring that kids can read once they hit third grade.
Okay.
And other issues that really have to be looked at. And my understanding is that in the next few days we'll know what was in these implementer bills. These bills really implement
Right.
the work of the legislature and give guidance to the State Department of Education, the State Board of Education, certainly in many cases school boards as well.
No, go ahead.
Well, I'm just hoping there aren't too many mandates,
Right.
that people aren't quite ready for. But we do appreciate the very good relationships we have with members of the legislature, as well as those in the governor's office and the governor himself.
I was going to say, I'm assuming they're probably going to be in special session for however long it takes to.
Well, the big issue is cannabis.
Yep.
My understanding is that it's only 2 or 3 days that they'll be in session.
Okay.
It seems like they don't finish, and then they always have more to do.
Oh,
but
absolutely.
That's understood. That's understood. And then we go through CABE goes through its own process in which we ask boards, send us resolutions. What do you want the legislature to do? What do you want state board? We get together. We have a committee that looks like this. Then in the fall, we have a delegate assembly that looks at all of these different issues and makes decisions on what CABE believes is the best way forward on these issues.
Bob Rader from Cable, would you mind sticking around for another segment?
Sure, my
right.
pleasure.
We'll be right back.
Thanks so much.
Community TV, your neighborhood TV.
Publicly funded and a reliable partner for cable companies nationwide. It provides transparent coverage of local and state government, education, and public programming.
A digital town green that can be watched anywhere, anytime, and on any device.
Watch us on today's high-tech distribution methods.
Community TV in Connecticut.
Local,
Unfiltered.
reliable, and yours.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
Welcome back to this week's edition of the Pete Mezzetti Show. I'm here's Pete Mezzetti sitting here with Bob Rader from CABE. Bob, welcome back.
Thanks so much, Peter.
Thanks, buddy. Hey, Bob, let's open up this segment talking about diversity.
Well, it's a tough issue.
Well, okay.
What we have done at CABE is really push. We have a committee led by Leonard Lockhart, who is the chair of the Windsor Board of Education.
Okay.
And we have been working on issues concerning diversity, equity, and inclusion for years. What we did this year is we did our first or second survey of our board members because we believe that some groups are underrepresented on boards of education.
Right.
Now, anybody is eligible as long as they're old enough and live in the town to run for a board of education. But we've seen over the years that there are fewer African Americans, fewer Latinos or Hispanics on boards of education. We want to encourage everybody to come out. We think it's very important, especially while the numbers of children of color are rising. They're about to go over 50% of the students in our communities, and it's very important that board members understand the concerns of these students. We have a wonderful consultant we hired, Dr. Martha Brackeen Harris, And we work certainly with Donald Harris, who is the president of CABE, also the chair of the Bloomfield Board, discussing these issues. And what we've seen over the last few weeks, and interestingly that we're having a couple of discussions, and it's in the newspaper, is the idea that some people are pushing that our schools are teaching what's called critical race theory. And CRT is a theory, but it's a way of looking at issues that maybe we haven't looked at in quite the same way before. It's talk about white privilege and what it means to be white as opposed to being a person of color, what it means for there to be systemic discrimination. We talk about oppression and who has oppressed in the past. But to me, with all these issues, and first of all, schools are not teaching critical race theory. What they're teaching about is how we should all learn more about the history of Black people, of Hispanic people in our country. And what I've learned, and I've done a lot of work in this area, I'm also on the Anti-Defamation League board that covers the Connecticut region. What I've discovered, and like I said, I've done a lot of reading and so on, is that our lens on our history in America has been fairly narrow. It's mostly about what white people did. But we don't talk enough about what people of color, and I would especially mention African Americans, have done to help us win our liberty and our freedom. I just read a very interesting book on the Civil War, the last year of the Civil War. And it talked a lot about how it was so important to get, in particular, freed slaves to come fight on the side of the Union once we got to the last part of the war. And that history, you might have seen a movie here and there that talks about it. Glory was one of those movies. But what I really learned, and I've been interested in the Civil War and history for many years, is about how these soldiers, these Black soldiers, former slaves, were treated. And they were not allowed, in many cases, by the Confederacy to surrender. They were killed, even though they were trying to surrender. This is a part of history we don't really talk about much. And another example of what we don't talk about is what happened in Tulsa, where there was a whole community, basically, that was called the Black Wall Street, that was decimated, burned to the ground. And if you've watched any of the programs showing what happened here, it's just awful. People who are lawyers and bankers and hoteliers lost their jobs, lost their hotels or their banks, and that's something that we really haven't paid enough attention to. I understand there's work going on in Tulsa because this is the 100th anniversary of that massacre. People are looking for where people were buried during this, but we don't talk about it enough. And for those who say, well, you're not talking enough about American history and how great it is, I don't see it that way. What I see is we have to broaden the focus so we know what happened in total, not only the story that has been told perhaps by our schools and by our parents about how great America is. I think America is great, don't misunderstand me, but there's a lot more to learn, and being sensitive to the needs of other people, especially when there are so many, is so important. I know that there's some research that has shown when there are people of color on boards, even just one or two on a board, and there are a number of students of color in the district, that those board members and the board is more likely to be sensitive to the needs of these students. So that's a long way around of talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we firmly believe in it. We firmly hope that people look when they're have empty places on their boards, people not running, to consider making sure that that other people in the community have the chance to serve on a board. That's how we keep the whole tradition and the whole system of boards of education going. And we've talked about it a lot. We're not saying get off the board if you're not the right color. We're certainly just talking about let's be sensitive to these people. And a Board of Education, one of its biggest jobs is making sure they represent all the kids in the community.
Absolutely.
Not just those from across the tracks or within the tracks.
Right, exactly.
But all the kids. And like I said, 48 to 50% of our kids now in our schools in Connecticut are of color. They are going to be the dominant group here in the state, but that shouldn't scare white people as it seems like this CRT seems to be scaring people. These are great kids. I've seen them in the schools. They care. Their parents care deeply. I ran into one of my wife who taught in one of our high schools. I came home from work yesterday and she had a bunch of the students she had worked with. She's just retired last year.
That's right.
But one of the kids came over and was from Swat, Pakistan. Brilliant. She's going to medical school. Her sister is a doctor.
Wow.
Really terrific. And if you know SWAT, I had to ask her about Malala, one of the great people in education. Malala Yousafzai. I might have said that wrong, but she was the Pakistani who helped open schools. Her father opened a school in the Swat Valley, and she was eventually taken off a bus and shot by the Taliban. She now lives, from what I can tell, in England, but she's a hero. What bigger hero is somebody who is working against known interests to ensure that all kids, especially including women and girls, get a chance to be educated. Absolutely. So this person I was so glad to talk to her, and she says, yeah, we lived a few doors down from Malala, but they're living in this country, they care deeply about this country, and they're going to be some of the best citizens we have in the next 20, 30, 40 years and going forward.
Absolutely. Now, you and I talked in the first half of the segment about running for Board of Education. Is there an age requirement?
No, we've seen kids as young as probably 18 as soon as they graduate from school. And many of the boards, including in Old Saybrook, have students on their boards of education.
Yes.
And what we really emphasize is they shouldn't be there to come in, say the prom is in 2 weeks and the graduation is in 3 weeks and this is what's going on, but really become a part of that board helping make decisions.
Absolutely.
Now I know some things are confidential.
Yep.
We understand that, but certainly to have that voice of students, and Eileen Baker has been absolutely central in helping this happen across the state from the K board and from the Old Saybrook board. And we have found whenever we have worked with younger students, high school students in particular, they have a different perspective. And we try to make sure at our convention, which will happen in Mystic in November. It didn't happen last year, except online.
That's right.
This year we're going to go for a one-day convention. But over the years, we've made sure in our general sessions to bring in students to talk about their perspective on our public schools, and it's been very eye-opening for board members, and they really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Matter of fact, speaking of people, you and I were talking earlier today about Dr. Carissa Niehoff.
Carissa. Carissa was the executive director of CAS CIAC. She has moved more than a year ago. I think it's more like 2 years already.
I believe so.
She has moved to Ohio. She works with the national sports teams and so on. And she was a wonderful, wonderful addition to the Connecticut mix of people in leadership. Love Carissa.
Oh, absolutely.
Spoke her mind, very forceful, very sensitive, very understanding, and I think it's great that she's there on the national level,
Yeah.
but I miss her, as do others in Connecticut.
Oh, absolutely. And then when Carissa went to out west,
Ohio.
Glenn took over.
Exactly.
That's right.
And he's a pleasure to work
Oh,
with as well.
he's great.
So we have been very lucky. And even before Carissa, Mike Savage was a good friend.
Oh, is that who?
Years ago. But we've been very glad to be able to have the chance to work with CAS CIAC.
Right.
I know that Patrice McCarthy, who I mentioned
Yep.
in the other segment,
Yep.
attends their board meetings, and frankly, they do great work. They care so much about the kids. It was sort of sad for me to watch what happened last year with sports.
Right. Oh, yeah.
The CAS CIAC board, and Glenn in particular, were doing their best for the kids, and the pandemic really hurt that year. But hopefully we won't have to go through that again. And I know that the sports teams are playing now, and it's just terrific.
Absolutely. There was not a year last year that Glenn Longarini was not on the news at least once a day.
Absolutely. And I know how Glenn worked on these issues
Yeah.
calmly, effectively.
Oh,
but I
absolutely.
know that it's got to affect anybody.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
thank you to Glenn.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
And thank you
absolutely.
to those people who serve on CAS CIAC's boards.
Absolutely. And you guys have obviously worked pretty closely with CAS CIAC as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They're fun to work with, and we've always enjoyed being in coalition with them and working
Yep.
together with them.
Absolutely. What else do we want to talk about?
Now you're asking me.
Let's see.
There are so many things going on in education today. Certainly, minority teacher recruitment is a very big issue.
Okay.
Connecticut has been working on this for years. Approximately 10% of our teachers, superintendents, and principals are of color now, and it's so important to have people of color. I serve on the State Department of Education's Minority Teacher Recruitment Policy Oversight Committee, and we talk about this all the time. It's very important for those 48 to 50% of our students who are of color to see people in authority of color, whether it's a superintendent, a principal, a teacher, for the same reasons that it's great to see members of boards of education and others of color. And I think it's an issue that we will keep pushing on. We know that when we get teachers into our schools, especially those who are of color, they need to be supported. They need to have other people helping them. And I know it's not just us, it's the National School Boards Association. First, the State Department of Education in particular. I know this is one of the big issues for Charlene Russell Tucker, acting commissioner.
Yeah.
So we're all working on that, as is the State Board of Education. We all think there's a need. We're encouraging people of color to get on our boards. One of the things we're running into, and I hear more about it from other states, but it's still an issue, is finding enough teachers, STEM teachers, that science, technology, and other types of education that you think with it being STEM, it would be easy to remember.
Exactly,
I'm trying to remember the E and the M, but certainly it is necessary for us to have enough science teachers, enough technology teachers, and it's hard to find them. And I would say, as unemployment went down over the last few years, though maybe not so much now, it's hard to find people to fill some of these particular positions. What we're encouraging boards to do is work with each other, and in some cases, maybe we learned from what we saw with COVID, and that a district who cannot find the right teachers can maybe link up with another district, possibly remotely, for a class that otherwise wouldn't be given in that school district. So that's one of the things we're suggesting, but the issue of not having enough highly qualified teachers is a concern. And certainly we're going to keep on talking about it and making sure that people know that this is teaching is a wonderful opportunity to affect kids. I see it with my wife and the program she brought into her high school. And there are teachers all across Connecticut who are working to make sure our kids are ready for their next part of their lives and into the global marketplace.
Now, one thing we didn't talk about yet, as far as what's going on, state and federal funding. Let's talk about money.
Yes, well, we know that the legislature has just finished going to the next year of the formula. We were a little concerned at the beginning of the session that they would not do so, but they did, and they added money both for this year, fiscal year 21, and fiscal year 22 in their budget. We know also that that's general education aid, which goes to all districts to some extent. They held harmless 81 of our districts which otherwise might have lost money because of the way the formula is pegged to help the districts who have less wealth. So we have been very pleased by what happened in the Connecticut legislature, but we also have been very, very happy about what the federal government has done under Commissioner Cardona, helping out with President Biden, helping out in the Congress. We also know that quite a bit of money is going to flow into Connecticut to help our districts. Now, not every district is getting a lot of money, but it is expected that the money will be used for things like helping kids over the summer. There's a lot of concern about the lag in what kids who have had a year of mostly remote learning might have lost or not gained as much as they could have. We're now talking about jumping ahead, Accelerate Connecticut is what it's being called. So there's money for that. There's money for SEL, which is social emotional learning. We know kids are coming back from trauma. That's something that can be helped. The problem we're all worried about is what happens when the federal government is not supplying as much money for our districts. So everybody is talking about that. School districts are trying to make decisions on how to use that money to help the kids now, but being very cautious not to commit themselves for more than the 2 years or 3 years that will come from the money that the federal government is supplying. And we know also that Congressman Courtney and the other members of our Connecticut delegation worked very hard on issues like ensuring there's enough special education funding across the country and certainly in Connecticut. The way in which the Congress originally passed special education, the IDEA bill, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which was called the Individuals with Handicapping Conditions, back when it was originally written in the 70s, said that the federal government would pick up 40% of the cost of special education. Now, every school board member and every member of the public who understands how school budgets work understand that in Connecticut, we only receive about 8% to 10% of the money of that 40% that goes to for special education, and that's because Connecticut is a rather wealthy state, and it's seen that way. But even across the country, they're only the Congress has only given about 20% of the cost rather than 40%. So if they go up enough, it will help Connecticut students, help their special education teachers, and so on. We know that children with disabilities are approximately 13% of our students, but because of their needs and sometimes having to be sent out of the district, that the costs are more like 20% of the total school district budget. And we're not trying to pit anybody against each other. They're all our kids. We have to take care of them. But we were very pleased to see, particularly from the Congress, really stepping up to get us as close to that 40% as possible.
By the way, before we talked about STEM,
yes.
Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's been a long day, and my wife will never forgive me. So I apologize to all you great STEM people out there.
That's okay. Well, okay. No problem.
So those are the major issues I brought with me.
Yep. Now, Bob, how as far as the
engineering and mathematics.
Yeah,
I apologize.
No. And how hard? I'm sure it's been difficult for like the boards of education to prepare and plan a budget.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. You know, a lot of the things the boards do, and they have three major things. They have to adopt policy, which is like the legislature adopts laws.
Sure.
They have to evaluate, hire, select a superintendent, and hopefully support that person. But if things don't work out, they have to figure out a way to terminate the services of the superintendent and adopt the budget.
Yeah.
And all of these things have to do with building relationships, building trust, building empathy. And while I think boards have done a very good job with it this year, it's been tough because they're not sitting down. One of the things we teach boards and new board members is it's very important to know the other people on the board.
Right.
You're always working toward coalitions because you can't do anything by yourself.
That's right.
You have to have a majority of the board voting that way. And the way you do that is understanding that, Peter really cares about, I'm just picking a subject, athletics.
Right.
But Chris really cares about the I don't know, the
band.
The band. I was going to say the marching band, but I was also going to say talk about kids with disabilities or kids who are doing very, very well.
Right.
So really what a board has to do, and the leaders of the board has to understand where everybody's coming from so they can address what everybody's agenda might be. And I don't mean agenda in a bad way, it's just why they might have gotten on the board.
Exactly.
So the way you do that is by getting to know people on a personal level, like I've gotten to know you, Peter.
Absolutely, Bob.
And certainly it helps when I have to call up and say, no, I can't make that date for a meeting, or you want to tell me.
Right.
But these are things that have been very difficult over the last year.
Yeah.
I am hoping people are starting to get together more, talking to each other. That's the basis of building these relationships. And a good board will do a lot of that. And we have some terrific boards in this area. And my hope is that they'll work not even just well with each other, but well with their superintendents, their communities, and of course with CABE.
Absolutely. We got a little bit more time left, but before we say goodnight, let's talk about really quickly what you think the fall's going to look like as far as school goes.
Well, my hope is that by the fall that our youngest kids who may not spread the disease as easily as older kids will be vaccinated, or at least start to be vaccinated. Certainly we are waiting for the CDC and the Department of Health to tell us when there is a vaccine that will be good for our kids. I think you will see kids coming back. My hope is that they'll all be in school, not remote, not hybrid, but in school hanging out with their best friends, learning from their teachers, taking part in all kinds of great intramural activities and great programs that we have in our schools for them. And my hope is that we did enough to let the graduates, especially from last year, who had such a tough year, missed out on their proms, missed out on the getting together. Hopefully, as I've seen in some districts, they've done new graduations for them and really provide our students who lost out last year what we can, and certainly going forward, I hope every year is great for them and everybody has a chance to really graduate and sort of be very proud of it and show everybody.
Absolutely. Bob Rader from Cable, we're out of time. I want to thank you for coming down. Hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Anytime you ask.
You got it. Bob, good to see you, my friend.
You too, Peter. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks, Bob. On behalf of Bob Rader, I'm Pete Mezzetti. Thanks. Good night. We'll see you next time.